I think it's probably time to move on to some interview questions.
Go on then. Should we do it? Should we do it?
I think so.
Alrighty.
Right. Lovely, Dave. What is the first book you remember reading and enjoying?
Yeah, so I came to reading quite late as a kid. I suppose, like a lot of boys do, it wasn't something that was part of my early childhood. My house wasn't full of books. I often feel a bit kind of a twinge of envy when I hear writers talk about, I had this great, introduction to books as a kid. Books are always in my house. I was always being read to, blah, 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 blah. That wasn't the case for me. And it wasn't until, and I remember this distinctly, it wasn't until I was about 10 or 11 and I was going on a family holiday with my grandparents and my mum. And we were driving from the UK to Germany, quite far south, I think in the Black Forest, although my geography is awful. So someone will probably tell me that's in northern Germany. But anyway, it was very far to a 10 or 11-year-old kid, especially to be in a car with your grandparents, which was pretty boring. So my mum, kind of, I'm not quite sure where she got this idea from, but she picked up a copy of The Hobbit for me to read. As I said, I'd not really been a big reader. Looking back on it now, I'm surprised I could even read, but I could just about. I just didn't look up. Probably from when we set out from southern England all the way to Germany. I think I missed the Alps. I just had my nose in this book the whole time. Was just blown away by, obviously, all the things everybody loves about The Hobbit. But for me, it was about this idea of I could be in a different place. I could be in a completely different world. Yeah. It would transport me in that way. And I think I've never really stopped feeling that sense of wonder about books and stories and, films as well, and other, games and things like that. But certainly I keep coming back to books for that full immersion. So that's the first one I can really remember reading and enjoying.
The Hobbit is a gateway drug to any kind of creative storytelling. Is just a wonderful story to hear. I'm just wondering, from your story in the last episode, obviously the child was illiterate. Was that sort of you working through some sort of perceived inadequacies about being a child that wasn't really a reader?
It's a great question. I hadn't considered that, but I feel like the one kind of clear thread through a lot of my work, whether it's the kind of secondary characters in Equinox, which is my witch hunt book, which came out this last year. There's a couple of very precocious children in there who are kind of budding scientists. And my kind of zombie Western trilogy, which starts with Your Brother's Blood, has a very precocious child as one of the main characters. So I think kind of children who show a kind of a wisdom beyond their years, I think is, or seem to be wiser than we adult readers might expect them to be, I think is definitely something that recurs through my writing. Not so much this question of inadequacy about reading, but I find that's a really interesting thing to pick up on now. It's the kind of thing, as a writer, in hindsight, you go, yeah, that's absolutely what I was working my way through. And who knows, as I said, I listened to some episodes of his show before coming on. I'll try and do that as much as I can whenever I'm lucky enough to be on a podcast. And I did know that this was a question that was going to come up, or at least I thought it might come up. So I was already thinking about that. So who knows, the subconscious, weeks before, writing that story may have been churning over that experience as well, and working through it.
I've found sort of that being able to have a space to tell stories is actually incredibly valuable in terms of working through either things that are only imagined about your childhood. It's still a really valuable process. I think that injecting them into a story format and finding out where's the drama and what's interesting, and it's quite a cathartic process potentially, depending on what subject matter you're dealing with.
I'm mostly just finding out I don't like posh people. That's all I've really learned from my stories.
This idea of like interminable car journeys as well, and train journeys and stuff. Oh, it's such a children have to be given books in that situation, otherwise it just all hell is gonna break loose. I think
it's a real shame because you'll know. Well, I know Ben knows very well. I get terrible motion sickness. And when I was a kid, my dad moved hours and hours away from my mum, so we had to do the car drive every Friday night after school, and then every Sunday evening, so we could go back to school on the Monday. And it meant I couldn't read or play a Game Boy or do anything like that in the car. So I always think of those times as these like unbearable, seemingly end. Like it's a car journey now. If I did it as an adult, I'd go, "Oh, we're there."
Yeah,
It wouldn't seem to be anything, but it felt like days adrift at sea. Not a drop of water, vomit churning in my gut. Like this is hell. I have died and gone to hell. But yeah, I am jealous. But what a wonderful way to spend a journey instead, like discovering Tolkien and awakening what turned out to be a great writer.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, it's I know what you mean, because I can't do it now. I can't read in a car now, so I feel like I've lost that as well. Which is
the police
gutting,
don't like it, do they? Because you're meant to look at the road.
yeah. I mean, I glance up every now and again.
So we know you like to read with a car around you, but when you're writing, do you have props around you to help with inspiration?
The short answer is no. My desk is just messy. I'm looking at it now and just thinking I really need to tidy this up. What I do have, not so much props, but I'm kind of fiddling with one now. I have things that are like, I guess the millennial equivalent of fidget spinners, just something I can kind of fiddle with. Like, it sounds terrible, obviously, but that is external from myself. It is
Dave. Yeah, no, he's just there. He writes fiddling with himself. It's great.
Clip that. Yeah, that's done. So yeah, it's just I've got a little, and of course my partner Catherine knows now to just every now and again she like buys me something new to just put onto the desk, and it just gets picked up and moved around in my hands so that my hands are busy. So at the moment I've got this kind of weird kind of scarab beetle looking thing that's I presume one would put it on a necklace because it's got a hole going all the way through from one end to the other. And of course the best thing is one side of it's really smooth and polished and the other is got rough little notches into it. So I'm quite a tactile person, so I like having those kinds of things to kind of fiddle with.
Yeah, I think it's a
fidget. Fidget is the word I should be using.
Fidget, not fiddle. Yeah, there we go.
Not fiddle. There we go.
I don't know if the mic will pick it up. If you could hear that popping, that's half of the yellow plastic thing from inside a Kinder Egg that I have been fucking around with the entire time we've been recording. So I feel you.
Nice. I'm glad I'm not alone.
my mic is on my left side. I really foolishly set up my desk like this, and I fidget with my left hand, which is right on. It's right under the mic, so I have to not do it every time we record.
Well, that's great. I'm amongst fidgeters then. So
yes, definitely.
Fidgeters and fiddlers. That's great.
Fidgeters, fiddlers, and curio hoarders, I think.
Ah, yes. Fidgeter on the roof. My favourite play.
Oh, wonderful. So when you are sort of not fiddling or fidgeting, and you're actually typing away, tapping at the keys, or indeed using a pen and paper, what gives you satisfaction in the process of writing?
That's a great question. I'm not one of these writers that skips to the desk and finds joy in every moment. I must admit. I think there's that great, obviously, that I always hear it getting attributed to George R. R. Martin, but maybe I'm sure other people have said it before that they don't necessarily enjoy writing; they enjoy having written. And I think I think there is obviously a huge amount of satisfaction of finishing anything, but that only happens so often when you're writing novels. I think that's one of the beauties of short fiction is obviously that satisfaction of having finished that. But I guess I would also extend that to just like a really good scene. I think when you come to the end of just a scene that really hits home in whatever way you want it to. I think that is hugely satisfying. I think that's the one that immediately comes to mind. I mean, the line by line stuff. I wouldn't say is necessarily something I get a big hit in the moment from. I think it's more about the bigger scenes for me.
So you'll sort of finish a mock-up of the first draft of a scene and sort of know that's done, or does it need to have been the sort of final draft of a scene that's good to get there?
No, I think in drafting it, I'll probably have that feeling the strongest, that satisfaction of wow, okay, so there's something there. It will need work and blah 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 blah, but that sense of capturing a moment or a feeling or a conversation. Often obviously in ways that surprise you, like that kind of adds to that satisfaction. I think you were like, oh wow, I wasn't sure it was going to go in that direction, but it really works and something there has really come together. I suppose, broadly speaking, I'm not that much of a planner. I'm not a total pantser, as they say for novels, but I certainly don't plan like scenes to the nth degree. So when something really pulls together, I guess there is an element of surprise to some extent of oh wow, okay, that's where it's going, or that's what I was trying to do here. So that can be really satisfying. And I suppose it's somewhat, you always have to have the yin with the yang. It's oft offset by when things just don't really work, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to put a pin in this and move on, but this isn't quite giving me that satisfaction.
I can really picture you sort of stroking your scarab, lighting up a big humidor, like, oh, I still got it, when you crack out a great scene. I'm gonna enjoy that.
Where are you getting the idea that he smokes a cigar from?
It just feels right, Ben. It's what I would do if I could competently write.
Are you a smoker, Dave? Are you a writer smoker?
No, I'm not a smoker. I have tried cigars once or twice in my life, but I always got the sense I wasn't really trying good cigars. I think I could only ever really get hold of cheap ones. And I think I did smoke a little bit in a misspent youth. So I find it quite hard not to automatically inhale, and that's obviously not a cigar move. So
I've never really understood them myself.
You're in the big leagues now.
Just turning green.
Right.
Just before we move on to the next question, actually, I do have a follow-up that is more towards your sort of game design writing kind of end of things. I believe it was one of your games was nominated for a BAFTA. Was that satisfying? In the same way that getting a book published was, or is it a different kind of satisfaction?
I should clarify that it's BAFTA Cymru, which was the Welsh BAFTAs for their game development category. Obviously that was hugely satisfying from, I guess, a kind of an external validation perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's I guess there's a different kind of satisfaction to that kind of what is most often the satisfaction we get as writers, which is a very much a kind of you on your own, and you're not really on your own because you've got all these characters and all these scenes and settings, and your work is your companion in that moment, I suppose. But it was satisfying. It was great to go to the ceremony. That was fantastic. To be surrounded by like TV people was really interesting. And just to have someone recognize what we were doing as kind of interesting and kind of worth giving that platform to was amazing. I haven't really had that experience so much with the writing, with the novels. I'm very lucky to be in print, and as I said, with some fantastic publishers that I've been lucky enough to work with, but nothing from any sense of an award, kind of even a whiff of an award. And I'm just trying hard not to sound kind of sour grapes about it, but that BAFTA feeling was the first time I've kind of had someone pick my whatever I'd worked on out of a sea of other fantastic material and say, like, let's recognize this. So that was absolutely hugely satisfying.
With the satisfaction, you're saying getting to the end of a scene when you write and be able to look back and go, I think that's landed. With a game, can you do that when you've just written it down, or do you need to see it sort of in situ with character models and with controls attached to it before you can really get a read on how your writing actually plays?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think game writing and prose writing, you're drawing on some of the same transferable skills, to use that kind of awful buzzword, but they couldn't be more different. I think that's one of the things. I work at a university in creative writing at the University of South Wales, and I do get students asking me about game writing, about writing scripts. I teach prose, I teach poetry, and I think what working in those spaces as both someone who's creative, but also someone who teaches, it's just really emphasized to me the importance of respecting how different each medium is, and knowing that you can take a swing at anything, obviously give it a go. But I think it's really important to go in knowing how little just because you've got some experience in a different area, and that's certainly how I approach writing for games. So I did as much research as I could and watched a ton of videos, and that's great nowadays that you can GDC and other major game development conferences put so much content online. And what I came away from that small amount of research really was that game writing is really about brevity. It's about so in many respects it's much closer to poetry than it is prose. You got to get in, make something happen, and get out. So that you're not in the way of the game most of the time. There are different game types.
That's a really good way of putting it. That sort of, it's almost like brevity, isn't it? You just need to express and get the tone across, and then let them press the buttons.
Yeah. And there's tons we could talk about in terms of like non-written ways of telling stories, whether it's through lighting or music or graphics or game mechanics. I think that's the thing that I came to really appreciate, was that I could still have an input in kind of the narrative of any given project we were working on, but it didn't need me to necessarily write something.
Yeah.
That concept of potentially what we're talking about is the fact that some people do overwrite games in the way that you can overwrite a scene or a description. Nico and I actually recently played a game, which I won't necessarily call out, I don't think, largely because I did return it because I thought it was actually shit.
Okay.
It wasn't one of yours though, so don't worry about that.
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
But it was just wall after wall of text. I was like, I'm not reading a fucking novel. Like,
yeah.
I'm not opposed to reading in like open world games, and like for example, I really enjoyed the first Mass Effect that has tons and tons of written content in it. but it was just getting in the way. And eventually, because we were playing it together actually, and about an hour in, I was just like, I can't keep doing this. This is just, I'm not playing a game. I don't feel like It's so really fascinating to see that you've almost immediately glommed onto that as a thing not to do, and then had good success in your adventures in game writing. It's absolutely great. It's really cool.
Right, Dave, no hesitation. What's your favourite novel?
Oh, Hyperion, I think, or maybe I Am Legend. It's one of those two.
What about what would you say would be the sort of deciding factor between those two?
I guess probably the person asking me, if I could kind of judge, A, if they had heard of either of those, and B, if they were kind of more into, and because it's often a thing that starts a conversation, right? So if they don't know what the hell you're talking about, it can be a bit rough. But yeah, I don't know how I would pick between the two. I guess one of the ways that question is often kind of conveyed as like, which one would you take to a desert island? And it would have to be Hyperion, just because it's a lot bigger and there's a lot it would keep me going for a few years. But I do have a lot of love for I Am Legend. So
how did you feel about the movie adaptation of I Am Legend?
I assume you mean the Will Smith one?
Yes. I do.
Yeah, because there are multiples. There's the Vincent Price early 60s one, I think it was, and then there's a really wacky Charlton Heston, slightly SF reimagining of I Am Legend, which is definitely, I was about to say definitely worth checking out, but I rescind that comment. It exists. I didn't mind it. I always feel with adaptations, it's weird kind of going into things, wanting them to adapt faithfully to the book. Always feels a bit weird for me. A really good example. My partner and I just started watching The Power on that on Daddy Bezos's streaming platform, and it's really faithful to the book, and we're probably not going to watch the second episode because we just kind of feel like we know it and we don't have any real drive to find out what happened. So I liked, one scene really stands out for me, which I think fair play Will Smith really sold, which was the death of the dog. And that's such a powerful moment in the book as well. I think they did, a really good job of conveying that. So, I didn't mind that they changed things, and, I found it engaging enough. The ending, bit of a cop out, but
I seem to recall there was some sort of odd thing happening where did they change the ending for the DVD release or something? Was there maybe it just came out that there was a totally different ending?
I think it released with one ending and was testing badly, and then they reprinted the different ending.
Crikey, really? That's so extreme, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
It's an intense ending for the book, and I'm not surprised that this Hollywood big blockbuster just wouldn't go with that. Which I think unfortunately does undermine the entire story, really, if you don't have that original ending. So but again, by my previous logic, I can't be annoyed that it provides something different.
Yeah, that's true.
If that's how I feel about adaptations, which I think I do.
We'll come back to that, don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
Music. Can you listen to music whilst you're writing? Do you need to listen to music whilst you're writing? Do you get inspiration from music?
Yes, and I do listen to music, and I am one of those heathens that listens to music with lyrics.
Yeah.
And I do. So I have a kind of a semi-ritual, I suppose, is that when I sit down to write, and it's I know it's going to be a good writing session, I will I've got playlists, as lots of authors do, for different moods, different projects, etc. and I will usually listen to at least 5 minutes of music without doing anything, kind of just staring off into space, listening to these tracks, which, because often it's proggy, it's probably only half a track for 5 minutes, and then I will start writing, and it just gets me into the headspace. I suppose if I was being zen about it, it probably helps my breathing and blah 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 blah. So I find that that's a very helpful ritual for me, and it also means I can write in public spaces. I don't do that very often. I'm lucky enough to have a home office, but if I do need to write in public, I crank up the volume in my headphones, and that doesn't cause me any trouble.
You mentioned prog as the musical choice. Did you discover prog on your own, or was that introduced to you by somebody?
That's a good question. I mean, like with a lot of music, I suppose it's from friends. So I probably did, get that from friends mostly. It's starting to sound like my upbringing was in bare white walls with nothing going on, but there wasn't much prog in the home as a kid. So yeah, I think university, as is often the case, isn't it? It's a fertile ground for getting stoned and listening to prog rock. So
sounds fantastic.
Do you have any tracks that are like, you're like, I'm gonna write a fucking book, and there's one track that you always bang on for that?
That's not really. No, I mean, I as I said, I have playlists for certain projects, and even within that, I won't always start on the same song. So that will change. But I do have so they're kind of proggy-ish, I suppose, prog adjacent, depending on your definition. But the band Coheed Cambria are a personal favorite. Okay, glad to hear there's another Coheed fan.
I've never heard of them before. So go on, who and what?
So the lead singer is mostly hair, so that's always a good place to start. And he's got a very interesting voice, quite high pitched for a big guy as well. So a lot of people are often like, "Huh, I assumed this was a female vocalist, but it's not."
Oh, wow.
And it is. They do tell a story alongside like the albums. There's concept. They're very concepty in that sense, and I quite liked that about them, especially early on. I still do to some extent. And some of their kind of more stirring 8-minute tracks will usually get me in the mood, and they produce that feeling of which people get from all kinds of sources, whether it's music, film, or a really good book can do this obviously too. It's just like, I want to create something that has the same effect for someone else that this piece of art is having on me right now in this moment. And there's a couple of Coheed tracks that do that quite regularly. So if I need an anthem to amp me up, like Nico was suggesting, it's something by them.
Okay,
I love this idea of like different creative art forms passing on this kind of this desired effect or energy to the next person to try and use it, and that sort of progress, it sort of grows and grows and grows. It's a bit like a particle accelerator, isn't it? Just absolutely throwing a feeling or an energy at people and seeing what they create with it and pass it on and so on and so forth. It's such a cool thing.
Oh man, all these like progenitor notes and stories,
Yeah.
like the beginning of human discussion and entertainment, slowly dripping down into new songs and stories and films and songs and stuff. That is one to get high and listen to Coheed Cambria and talk about. I'm telling you now.
We just found our summer, I think.
Right, this is all too jolly. What's the least enjoyable trope of fiction for you, Dave?
Least enjoyable trope of fiction. I'm not a massive fan of monarchy, actually, and this is hardly surprising. Like writing as DK Fields with my partner Kath, we took a swing at a democracy in fantasy, and I think my stuff is kind of broadly fantasy or horror or strange genres like zombie western, but I kind of think of myself as a horror, fantasy, science fiction writer, not flailing between the three, I suppose. And when we set out to write fantasy, we very clearly said we want to write a big fantasy book. Let's see how we go about doing that. It was quite quickly something we decided is like we wanted to see what would happen if we took out monarchy, because it seemed, so often the way, especially kind of the bigger, more mainstream, the kind of W.H. Smith fantasy, if you like, relies so heavily on those tropes and structures and power structures to generate drama and tension. And I get it. I think as a writer, it's very convenient. I think as a reader, it's very familiar. And I think that's one of the reasons I find myself probably reading more SF than I do fantasy, is because they don't, they just have these other power structures available to them in a way that it's often a lot more interesting.
I think that's a really salient point, because it's still such a massive keystone of fantasy in particular, isn't it? This monarchy and kingship. Years and years ago, I attended as an audience member, obviously, a panel discussion with several very prominent authors at LongCon when Worldcon was in London.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Abercrombie was one of the people on the panel, and he mentioned his outlook on that. If I'm paraphrasing, so we'll have to. It was a long time ago, but basically, my understanding was that he was saying that there always has to be some sort of discussion of kingship or monarchy inside fantasy. Either you're exploring it or deconstructing it, or you're interrogating why it's not there. And that really stuck with me for a very long time. So I've also enjoyed playing around with concepts of like inserting democracies where they almost feel like they shouldn't be. Do you feel like you were successful?
That's a short question, but a complicated one. I feel like I was successful. I think what it generated was really exciting for us as writers. I think it worked really well writing something together as a kind of a partnership, which is a weird thing to do anyway, and very challenging in lots of ways. We managed to create power structures that generate the drama and tension we needed. So in that sense, yes. Would it have been easier with the monarchy? Probably. But I mean, I think I'm one of those writers that if there's not a challenge in there somewhere, I will get bored.
I can appreciate that. And I think it sounds like the way that you approach writing is really admirable, and it clearly has a very positive output for you. But that sort of fairly neatly leads us on to our next question, which is about the writing process. And obviously, you've mentioned a couple of times that you have written some books with your partner. What does that process look like?
Messy. Those that animal messy, people messy we were talking about in the story. It's a lot like that. This is the Tales of Finesse trilogy. Starts with The Widow's Welcome, again published by Head of Zeus. We set out to write a big fantasy book. Neither of us had done that before. We didn't know how to do it, and it kind of came about as a result of a conversation we had that was like, oh, I wonder how you do that, or I don't know, do you want to try doing it together? Which at the time seemed bizarrely to make sense, as if like you would take a problem that neither of you know how to solve and then try and kind of do it together, thus doubling the problem, right? Like, it's just, looking back on it, makes no sense. So the process for that started out, I mean, I guess kind of as it should when you're trying to write a democratic fantasy. It started out as democratically as possible. We would, we came up with a ton of ideas together. We, worked very closely, in the generative stage of spitballing ideas, etc., etc. But when it actually came to the writing, we would pass a chapter back and forth, adding text. We were lucky enough to be traveling at the time, so we spent 5 months going from north to south in Italy.
Amazing!
That sounds amazing.
It was really good. We were a month in a city. We could do this because of Airbnb, and Airbnb being quite, if you can find a spot, quite reasonable for that kind of length of time. And we kind of knew this, but like we had our own reasons. But we were basically in the cities, every city at the wrong time of year.
Okay, yeah.
Which made it a lot cheaper, funnily enough.
Yeah.
So we started in the north in summer, and then ended up right down in the south in the winter, which again for us seemed to make sense. It's like, well, it's way too hot in the south in the summer, so we'll start in the north. But no one was there. Half of Turin closes in the summer. We didn't know that until we got there, but it meant there was plenty of time for writing. But anyway, we would bounce chapters back and forth, like a 3 days on, 3 days off kind of vibe of writing, and it was really interesting, and it generated this cohesive voice, which I think is, we were writing the same point of view character. Now, like anyone who's thinking about writing as a partnership, don't do that. Okay, just take different POVs each, and just make your lives a lot easier. But we somehow hashed it out, and what came out was good. We kind of, in the real crucible of arguments and disagreements, came out of this. It hardened this narrative voice that seemed to work quite well for us. So that was kind of how we forged the first book, was just like back and forth chapter each. And then we learned the lesson not to do that for books 2 and 3, because we were on a contract to deliver the next book in what really works out as less than a year, like 10 months.
Oh wow.
So the Tales of Finesse trilogy, what they have in them, and this is the democracy at work in this world, is that they tell stories. It's all about telling stories. That's how you win power. And each book, it's kind of, it works well with like real world politics, right? We're always just telling each other stories about the world.
Especially around here.
Yeah. yeah. I'm not gonna mention the B word. Anyway, that we each book has 2 of these election stories in them, and they're really sizable. They're about 25 to 30,000 words each, these election stories, and you get them as the reader in full. So you're able to kind of be a voting presence, if you like, over the course of the trilogy. Like, which one would you have voted for the different kind of party, if you like, to get into power?
This sounds fantastic.
So what we did, what was helpful, and we didn't necessarily think about this going forward, like initially, was that of course that meant one of us could go off and write this, the election story for this realm, and we could do that on our own, and we'd have input from the other person, but it wasn't writing on top of each other's shoulders or in each other's shoes or whatever, as much as the frame narrative was. So by books 2 and 3, it was just like, right, you write the election stories, I'll write the detective fiction frame of it. So that worked a lot better.
I'm not really sure how to frame this question, so I'm going to try and figure out as I go. So obviously, writing with a romantic partner, when you speak to each other, I think in any couple over even after a few days, you start to develop, your own love language. And I don't mean like, oh, cooking is my love language, but ways that you communicate, words you say to each other, ways of speaking with each other. Did that find its way into your work at all because you were both writing and trying to find a common language to write in?
I think, if I understood it correctly, it might have worked the other way, in the sense that things that we wrote into the book became part of our love language.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some of the God, now of course my mind goes blank. But there are certain phrases that we had that were in, and I, to be honest, I don't even know if they survived into the final draft of Widow's Welcome. But there were a couple of phrases that became kind of shorthand, in our relationship for various different moments and ideas and feelings. And it's terrible that I'm blanking on it. That seems really bad. But
it's a very private thing, I think, especially if it didn't make it into the the public copies. But that's what a lovely insight into that, how your professional and romantic relationships were entwined in the creation of a piece of art. It's fantastic.
I mean, that's a lovely way of putting it, and it's certainly a more positive element to what was at points, of course, a very fractious and charged experience.
Catherine, I'm sure you're listening. He means well. Bless him.
I didn't say sorry enough. I could never say sorry enough. Let's put it that way.
You just hand in a draft and it's just all the words sorry in a sort of Kubrickian kind of horror.
Did you manually type this 30,000 times?
Because we actually, obviously, it's a bit different because Nico and I are not romantically engaged, but we have considered a few times writing stuff. Yeah, well, one-sided, unrequited, perhaps. But obviously, there were. I was really listening then for like tips and stuff on what's the best way to approach it. I mean, do you have any like final tidbits of how you would recommend people write together on something, even if they aren't romantically engaged?
I mean, firstly, don't be romantically engaged would be my first tidbit, because I think that I think what we quickly realized is, I mean, this is a positive and a negative for a creative process, is that we could really misbehave and be brutally honest, and in a way that you probably would maybe have those responses in a creative process, but you would mediate them. You would manage them in a way that was probably a bit more constructive, whereas this was just both barrels, pistols at dawn kind of stuff, over a chapter or a line, or sometimes even something as stupid as where a comma should go, which of course is terribly important. So like, obviously try and behave well. So you're trying to write with someone, and you will, I'm sure, feel very strongly about things, because you're invested, they're invested too. Disagreements are going to happen, and I suppose the real test of any writing partnership is how you manage and go beyond those disagreements, just like any relationship, really. I think from a more concrete perspective of like what would actually be useful for writing, obviously back everything up all the time. It is true of any writing, but I think with and try and have a good naming system for stuff, because you're going to have two people like saying, is this the right file? Is that, have you got...
Oh yeah, good file structure.
Yeah, good file structure. I genuinely think you could, you could write the same POV, but I think you will make your life a lot easier if you go into it knowing that there'll be multiple points of view, and you will perhaps take separate ones for whatever reason through whatever part of the story. It just makes your lives as writers a lot easier. That is if you're going to both be doing a lot of the, kind of the writing. I think, like we were talking earlier, Ben, about working with people with different skill sets.
Yeah.
You can still do that in a writing partnership. were once at a library event with Nikki French, who is also a writing partnership, and kind of asked them the same kind of question.
Sure.
And what it transpired, I think I have this right, so apologies for some reason this has become semi-apocryphal in our household, but the idea is that I think one of them does all the planning and the other one does all the writing.
Oh wow!
And it's just like for them, it works that way. It blows my mind, right? Like you would plan a novel and then not write it. I mean, to be honest, that sounds brilliant. If someone else could write my novels for me. Yeah. So don't feel you have to write everything. I suppose like part of the joy of this is that something comes back. And someone else has been working on it.
I'm legitimately appreciative of that advice. So thank you for going into that in such detail. I really do appreciate it.
You heard it from a professional there, Ben. You write the setups, I'll write the punchlines.
There you go. Done. Yeah. All the way to the bank.
No, we're already at a problem because I thought you'd give me the ideas and I'd go and write them.
Oh, fuck! Speaking of someone else writing something and you doing something with it, Dave, it's my favourite question. You are given an unlimited budget to adapt any book into any other medium. What book would you pick? What medium would you go to, and why?
Gosh. Okay. Given that kind of what we've been chatting about earlier, I think I would probably go for Hyperion, the rock opera.
Okay.
Okay. I think it'd be great to see as a film, and I think there have been bits where it has been suggested it would be a movie, and someone probably owns the rights to it, etc. But yeah, I think getting some kind of major prog rock kind of production of Hyperion would tickle me in a lot of different ways.
Original songs, or would you license out a band? Like, if the band's catalog.
Yeah. I'm such a fanboy. I'd love to get Coheed involved, and I know they've done some projects for movies and things like that, so I don't think it'd be too hard to sell.
Especially with an unlimited budget.
Exactly. Yeah. Just throw money at them.
£1 squillion.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. If I'm allowed a second, because I did get a second favorite book, I would be really interested in a really kind of well done, but kind of almost monochrome anime version of I Am Legend. I think that would be a really fun project to kind of, because we've had a lot, I'd include myself, a very small part of myself in this as well, but we've had a lot with the kind of zombie style stuff and narratives, obviously with, the recent adaptation of The Last of Us as well. So I think there's still room to explore some different kinds of stories there. I love The Last of Us, but it felt very familiar in certain moments. I actually haven't played the game, I must admit. So, but certain elements of it felt really familiar. So I'd really like to see someone push something like the strange kind of last person on Earth, hunkered down vibe that I Am Legend has, and do that in a kind of really cool animated style. So yeah, those two.
I love the idea of it being monochromatic as well, like all the color drained out of the world when all the other people died.
Yeah,
that's really poetic. I like it. Good answers. Very good answers.
I actually had the budget to let you do it now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I'll get on to someone in the morning about that.
This is when I turn up to the money people. I got my notes mixed up. I'm like, yeah, it's I Am Legend, the rock opera.
An anime Hyperion wouldn't be too bad. I'd take that too.
So, where should we have an audience, we have people listening. Where should they start reading you? What should they pick up first, and where should they begin their journey of reading, or indeed playing the things that you've made?
Okay. I would say Equinox is a great place to start. It's standalone. So, I know some people are quite keen on that these days. The standalone fantasy, horror, science fiction novel. You find them, but they're out there to find, obviously. But they're I think there's a swing in readerships of like, it's actually quite nice to have a standalone to know I'm not going to be buying into a series right now. So that would be a solid place to start. And if you like that and kind of what it does and some of the questions it asks and some of the answers it doesn't give you, then I think you would like start the walk-in trilogy with Your Brother's Blood. And that's really pared back. I mean, kind of like the stories I read earlier, the language is quite, downplayed, quite muted, quite pared back. I think in Your Brother's Blood, I went to the nth degree with that, and it's really, I've called it in the past Dust Bowl prose. Cool. It's dry, and it kind of fits the kind of Western vibe to the whole thing, I think. But so that would be another place to start, and then, I can't not say try the DK Field stuff as well.
Especially after all we've heard about it. It sounds phenomenal.
Yeah, I would say, you won't necessarily know where it is because obviously it was co-written, but I think my best writing is in that trilogy. And I would say if you're a little unsure at the start, like push through. I know it sounds terrible that you have to push through, but push through to the first election story. And if you read the first election story and you're still not sold on the trilogy, fair enough. It's probably not the book for you. But I think that's for me where that trilogy really comes alive is those election stories.
Where we know they can get you books in the Evil River place.
Mm-hmm.
We know they are in a few other places, but if people want to find you and your work on the internet, where can they go?
Twitter. I'm on @D_Towsey. I do have a website of sorts, a blogger. God, that seems embarrassing to admit these days, but so you can find some info there. I tend to use it mostly as a way to link to other people's stuff, to be honest, whether it's reviews or guest posts or podcasts like this one. I'll be updating the blog site with a link to the show. So that's if you just Google David Towsey, it'll be one of the top hits.
I believe it's davidtowsey.blogspot.com.
There we go. Thank you. I'm glad you know it and I don't. That's terrible, isn't it? And then if you're interested in the gaming stuff, it's the very strange Pillbug. So that's pill as in pill and bug as in bug, all one word, but pillbug.zone.
Zone is cool.
Yeah, I like that. It's a weird deep cut joke that from my business partner's gaming past that I don't really get, so I can't really explain it. But you don't hear many dot zones.
Dave, I've got to thank you for being in our dot zone.
Yes.
It's been bloody lovely.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Yeah, I found your outlooks really insightful, and I think you've really enhanced my understanding of how one can approach the creative process of writing and life in general. So thank you.
And I desperately want to get Catherine on and hear the other side of that story.
I'm sure if you ask nicely, she'll come along. She'll have a great time, I'm sure.
Well, until next time, we'll say goodbye to you now, Dave. But thank you again for your time, and please, everyone, do go and grab his books and play his games because they all look fantastic.
I thought about fucking a house.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter @BookcaseTiny, Facebook @The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at Bookcase Tiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?